live chat. I've got a feeling that the camera is sort of an angle like this. Not suppose it makes any difference, but all the same, I'll try and straighten it up a bit. There, that's probably a bit better. So today I'm going to continue the Lithuanian theme of what I started yesterday, and so I'm going to be talking now about the Rollkommando Hamann, which murdered around 40% of the Jewish population of Lithuania in a matter of a few weeks. And so as always, if you've got any questions, you can put them down and I'll answer the questions later, as always, when I get onto it. A little bit of technical stuff here. It's raining quite heavily outside, and I've also got the light on inside, which is only 8 o'clock. And if the rain gets too heavy and my voice is not audible, then please write it down, because then I can stop and I can save it, the rest of it, for tomorrow or some other day. So anyway, so in the summer and in the autumn of 1941, 137,346 Jews were murdered in Lithuania, and around 40% of this number of these victims were murdered by something called Rollkommando Hamann, a small ad hoc killing unit that went from place to place, murdering all the Jewish people it could find there, or which had been found there for it to murder. And we know a lot about the detail of this thanks to a document called the Jaeger Report, which was written by SS Standartenführer Karl Jäger. So even before the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazi German leadership had planned a civil administration for the territory which was to be conquered, and this was to be placed under the command of Hinrich Lohse as the Reich Commissariat Ostland. According to a draft document entitled the Provisional Guidelines for the Treatment of Jewish Citizens, the Jewish population was to be removed from rural areas and moved to cities where anti-Jewish measures were to be taken. Now, following the rapid occupation of Lithuania in June and July of 1941, the head of Einsatzgruppe A, Walter Stahlecker, wrote a message or a letter on the 6th of August 1941, suggesting that the original plan did not take into account the realities which they now found in front of them, and which give the Nazis the opportunity of resolving their Jewish question. And he proposed, and I'm now quoting him, an almost 100% immediate cleansing of the entire Ostland. I hate to use this word cleansing. It means murder, or it might mean depopulation, but whatever, it is not very pleasant. He also proposed the prevention of the reproduction of Jews and ghettoisation as a significant facilitation for the later mass deportation to a non-European Jewish reservation. Of course, he's not using the word murder because they didn't use that word, but it's quite clear what he actually meant. I looked at some documentation by the Stahlecker's driver, he was a Lithuanian, and he also translated for him as well. And Stahlecker didn't actually use the word murder, but the driver sort of indicated by sort of doing this type of a motion that he was really referring to murder, to make it quite clear what was actually going on. Now, when Stahlecker sent this message, I would suggest that, but of course I can't prove this, and there's no documents to back this up, but I suggest that once Himmler read this, he agreed and issued the appropriate orders to Stahlecker to kill the Jewish population. Now, you may remember that yesterday I said that when the Nazis occupied Lithuania, they started killing people immediately, but the excuse they used then was that these people were Jews. These people were communists. The victims were communists, either real or imagined communists. I mean, they could say, "Oh, because he's Jewish, he's communist automatically," or something like that. But the reason for murdering people in the initial wave was for them being communists, and it was only in August of 1941 that they started murdering people for ethnic reasons. That is to say, because they were Jewish. And the first large massacre took place on the 15th, 16th of August 1941. SS Obersturmführer Joachim Hamann had 3,200 Jewish people shot. A large number of these people were women and children, and this was the first large killing where they were killed for being Jewish, uniquely for being Jewish. Also, it's worth pointing out that at the beginning they just tended to kill men of military age. Well, military age, that could be anybody from say 15 to 60 or plus. Anyway, so now to return to Karl Jäger. He was born in Switzerland in 1888, so he's even older than Hitler, and so he was old enough to be Stahlecker's father. Well, I'm exaggerating a bit there, just about, but he certainly was old enough to be Hamann's father. And his family moved to Germany in 1891. He participated in World War I, post-war period. He was an early Nazi, formed a local Nazi party group in the town he was living in the southwest of Germany, in Baden-Württemberg, in March of 1923. So even before the beer hall putsch. He had a business which made musical instruments. It went bankrupt during the 1931 depression. He made him unemployed, but he hated the Weimar Republic so much he wouldn't even claim his unemployment benefit, for which he was entitled. He joined the SS in, I think it was the end of 1932, or I think it was the end of 31, whatever. And once the Nazis were granted power, he had a career in that organization, and he initially went off to the Netherlands when that was occupied, and he was sent back, and he was appointed a lead of Einsatzkommando 3 in either late May or early June of 1941, and this was deployed as part of Einsatzgruppe A in the Baltic states at the beginning of the war against the Soviet Union. So on the 23rd of September 1941, he was appointed the commander of the security police and the Sicherheitsdienst, the security service for the general region of Lithuania, and this was based in the former Lithuanian capital of Kaunas. And his office had 141 people working there, which included an interpreter, and he was also supported by the Lithuanian Auxiliary Police, which was made up of the so-called white armbands, men who had previously opposed the Soviet occupation. And due to this role in Kaunas, he wrote the Jaeger Report of the 1st of December 1941, in which he listed in detail the number of people the Nazis murdered. Not just Jews, but also the mentally ill people, Roma and others. This was a total of 138,272 victims. In the report, he wrote, and now I quote, although I've translated it so it might be slightly off, "I can state today that the goal of solving the Jewish problem for Lithuania has been achieved by the Third Reich. There are no more Jews in Lithuania, except for the working Jews and their families, and these people were in the ghettos in Šiauliai, Kaunas, and in Vilnius." He went on, "I also want to kill these Jewish workers, including their families, but this earned me a sharp challenge from the civil administration and the Wehrmacht, and triggered a ban on me killing them. These Jews and their families must not be shot. The goal of making Lithuania free of Jews could only be achieved by setting up a mobile detachment of selected men under the leadership of SS Obersturmführer Hamann, who fully embraced my goals and knew how to ensure cooperation with the Lithuanian partisans and the responsible civilian authorities." So he's sort of more or less claiming here that the Wehrmacht and the civil administration was getting in his way, and so he set up this Rollkommando, according to what, if I've interpreted what he said correctly, because that was a way of sort of getting around the people, the Wehrmacht and others who were getting in his way of killing people. Joachim Hamann was born in Kiel on the 18th of May 1931, and although he was born in Germany, his family was of Baltic German origin, a bit like Rosenberg, for example, and that was possibly why he was considered to be an expert. On the 1st of February 1932, he joined the Nazi Party, membership number 958322. After the Nazis were granted power in 1933, he got a job in the police. From there, he was transferred to the Gestapo headquarters in Berlin. It's worth pointing out, as I've done in the past, that if you joined the police, you could be rotated into the Gestapo as a normal way. The fact that somebody was in the Gestapo doesn't mean necessarily that they were evil. For example, I did a video on the person who interviewed Sophie Scholl, and who remained friends with the father, the parents of Sophie Scholl after the war. So I think that you can't say everybody was evil because they were a member of the Gestapo, but in his case he certainly was evil. And once he was at the Gestapo, there were people who were transferred from the Gestapo to the killing centres. For example, we've got the Lange, Herbert Lange, who was the commandant at Belzec, who was he worked in the Gestapo in various places before being transferred to the killing centres in the Warthegau. And so anyway, so in the case of Hamann, he was transferred to Einsatzkommando 3, so he came directly under Karl Jäger's command, and of course under SS Brigadeführer Walter Stahlecker's command. And so the Rollkommando Hamann, his role in this was to kill people in Lithuania and in southern or southeastern Latvia. So it would seem that it was Walter Stahlecker who had the idea of doing this Rollkommando. Probably it wasn't Karl Jäger, as he claimed in his report, or seemed to insinuate in his report. Of course, Karl Jäger agreed, and he allowed Hamann to recruit 8 members from his Einsatzkommando. So that was it, 8 Germans plus Hamann and maybe Jäger overseeing things. That's 10 people in it. So the unit had no fixed structure. It consisted essentially of Hamann, his deputy Helmut Raucher, the one who ended up in Canada later, and I've got some other names here, but I can't say anything about them because I just can't find anything worth. Post, Josef Stutz, Walter Seltzman, Heinz Mack, and Walter Planet. And depending on the needs of the day, they could find 50 to 58 Lithuanians from the 3rd Company of the TDA if they needed so many people to do the killing. Now the TDA in Lithuania stands for the National Labour Service. These men were former anti-communists. Indeed, the word partisan, which I mentioned earlier, in the Lithuanian language is often applied to them. So the word partisan in this case is people who fought the Soviets. The Soviets occupied Lithuania in June of 1940, and so these partisans were people who took part in resistance activities, and this resulted in the armed uprising in Kaunas and in other places in June 1941 that managed to capture large parts of the capital from the Soviets. They identified themselves with with a white armband in the days of the revolt against the Soviet Union, and this continued to be worn during the Nazi occupation until some sort of uniform could be found for them. We can see lots of photographs, maybe not lots, but we can see some photographs where we've got people walking around with these white armbands on them. And so, sorry, I'll come to the questions at the end, otherwise it puts me off. I forgot what I just said. So the Nazis used these men to form what was known as the TDA, to act as auxiliary police units, and they were used amongst other things for the murder of the Jewish population of Lithuania. We have three names of Lithuanian lieutenants: Anatolius Dagius, Josas Barzda, and Bronius Nokus. I'm sorry, I don't speak Lithuanian, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and probably aren't. The Jaeger Report documents the commando's mass shootings, which were carried out 54 places in Lithuania and in Latvia. As far as Latvia was concerned, there was the part of the commando was there 13th of July to 22nd of August 1941 in Daugavpils, and it murdered 9,102 people there, mainly from the Daugavpils ghetto. So the means of murder was as follows. The Rollkommando, so a Rollkommando means, well, rolling commando, so traveling commando, or something like that, mobile unit, but that's what an Einsatzgruppe was, so it's something even more mobile than the Einsatz commandos were. So the Rollkommando would announce to the local Lithuanian police the day before the murder was about to take place that a mass shooting of Jews would happen the following day. The police and their volunteers were to prepare for it by rounding up the Jews. They had to dig mass graves, they had to provide escorts and guards, and then they had to have people available to see that the Jewish victims were undressed at the designation site. The murder location was chosen for its remoteness, but it couldn't be too remote that the transport would be a problem. For example, I talked yesterday of the place in Mariampol, which was easily walkable from the center of the town, but it was pretty isolated. Although I think that the gunshots could have been heard for some distance. The firing squads, as always, were given lots of alcohol, and on the morning of the murder, so the alcohol had to be there, and the Rollkommando would possibly arrive from Kaunas. It was usually based in Kaunas, but not necessarily it was there. A few dozen people would turn up to do the mass murders, and once they'd finished killing people, the locals had to shovel the mass graves in, and the clothing and the property of the victims was divided amongst the perpetrators. So Karl Jäger, head of Einsatzkommando 3, he sometimes turned up, but most of the time he couldn't be bothered. And it was even times when neither he nor Hamann nor any other German even turned up. They just passed the order to the TDA battalion, and they went there and did the killing. So at the beginning, it was just Jewish men of military age. But as I said earlier, after the middle of August, they would kill all Jews irrespective. In October of 1941, Hamann was transferred to Berlin to the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, where he was employed in Office 6, which was the Foreign Department. In 1942, he was involved in Operation Zeppelin, which was a plan to use Soviet prisoners of war who were prepared to work for the Germans as agents and commandos deep inside the Soviet Union. Now, this idea was sort of mainly do sabotage behind the lines. They realized quite quickly that Germans wouldn't be able to do it because they'd be caught very quickly, but Soviet citizens who didn't like communism would be able to do it, and that was Operation Zeppelin. However, Operation Zeppelin didn't produce any results. Operation Zeppelin was an SS project. It was nothing to do with the Abwehr, military intelligence. And after it was wound up, Hamann was moved to Department 3 in 1943, which the object of the RSHA. There he had to, the object was to combat the right-wing opposition inside Germany, and the right-wing opposition being conservative opposition, really. And in this role he participated in the investigation of those involved in the attempted coup of the 20th of July 1944, in which case he must have come across Herbert Lange, the former commandant at Helmand ad Nerum, again, who was in charge of that operation. He was also later in that year, or possibly even early 1945, appointed aide to Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who was head of the Reich Security Main Office. He took over from Heydrich, although several months after Heydrich was killed, or died, if you like. So at the end of the war, Hamann returned to his hometown of Kiel, and whether or not this was an effort to try and seek shelter in his hometown, or he just went home, or he was trying to use the northern rat line. A rat line was also used for Otto Ohlendorf, for example. For me, is not clear, but possibly he realised that he wasn't going to get away with it, and on the 13th of July 1945 he committed suicide. But he, by the thing is, with his roll command, within effectively he was sent back in October 1941. So in this period of literally a few weeks, they managed to kill 40% of those Jews who were killed in Lithuania, and what's about 30% of the entire population, Jewish population of Lithuania, and certainly nearly all of those Jewish people living in rural areas. So okay, so that's my little chat on that. I'll come to your questions. I'll come to your questions now. So hello, Craig, Mike, David, X, and oh, thank you. Well, that's very kind of you. And Hans. Hans writes, what was the general background of the Lithuanians who quickly joined the Germans and carried out all these terrible acts? Right, now, this is a hard one to answer, and it's often a hard one to answer, this one, so to come to the background of anyone. They were clearly people who were anti-communist, but the thing is that everybody who was in the resistance wasn't anti-Semitic. That's clearly, that must be the case. It was possibly one or two at the top. Now the thing was this though, was they identified, as far as the Lithuanian resistance, they identified Jews and Poles with communists. And probably Russians as well, but there weren't many Russians there. So they were the ones, they were Lithuanian nationalists on the whole. And Jews were, one of the problems with both Jews and Poles, as far as they were concerned, was they didn't speak Lithuanian. Jews mainly spoke Yiddish, or they might speak, some of them spoke Russian, some of them spoke Polish, particularly in the west of Lithuania. And I mean, in Kaunas, when Lithuania became independent after the First World War, Polish was probably spoken more in the city than it was actually than Lithuanian was. I say that probably. I'm sort of hedging my bets on that one. But so these were, if that is the case, I would suggest that these people probably came from more rural areas than the cities, and they possibly came from more from the central areas. It needs to be borne in mind, of course, hatred to Jews, which had been perpetrated by the church for well over hundreds of years, anyway, say around 1,000 years. I mean, I usually put the beginning of the hatred of Jews to the sermon at Clermont-Ferrand in 1095, but it existed for hundreds of years, this hatred of Jews, blaming Jews for everything that went wrong. I don't know if I've explained that very well. I mean, things more has to be done on that question. So Hans further writes, I thought most Jews in Lithuania were countryside farmers. Farmers are rarely communists, so where they associate with Soviet communism. Yeah, this is the problem. There was in Lithuania, there were many Jewish people living in the countryside, and that was, in fact, this was even noted in the report I mentioned, that they'd have to round up the Jews from the countryside. I mean, I'm not aware of any document of that nature existing in Poland, for example, and whereas Jews did live in small villages. I mean, I've got plenty of videos of places where, but these were more shtetl. Where they were just Jews. There was far more farmers in, I think, I don't know if it's fair to say Lithuania, but certainly Lithuania, maybe northeastern Poland, where the agricultural thing. The thing is this: I don't think that they needed to associate. They were Jews. That was enough to associate them with communists. That was it. It's totally bizarre to associate people with business and with communism at the same time. It's totally ridiculous. It is. So this is the problem, and you see this all the time. I mean, this people who hate will hate, and this. I mean, you see this in politics. I mean, just to quote a comment, it was somebody had a go at me over one video I did, which was anti-communist, and had a go at me for being a leftist. So you know, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just totally. It's totally bizarre if somebody's a anti-communist and as a leftist. Anyway, whatever. So David is from Chicago, and the Lithuanians. Oh, and Lithuanians. David knew didn't like Jews. Yeah, I think it's related to the church more than anything else. Now, I did read this admittedly in a Russian paper, but I read it today. And it said that in Lithuania there are sort of every 4 to 5 weeks there's at least one incident of a Holocaust site being desecrated. And I can say this: what I didn't say a great deal, but a little bit that I saw, I would say two things came out for me. That it was very well marked, the places to visit. And that's number one, and they certainly weren't desecrated. And the video I put up yesterday, there's a photograph that I took, and you can see the amount of stones that have been put on the monument for the people who were murdered. Of course, there could have just been a group there from Israel, and they would just put all the stones on there. But I don't know. Incidentally, on the subject of the avatar I used today shows what I think is 3 men who came from Calvaria and who were sent, and that's they're waiting to be killed in. They're waiting to be killed in Mariampol. So that'll be on the 1st of September 1941, but you can see in their faces there's a older man in the centre, but the 2 younger ones have clearly been whipped across the face. I mean, it's quite a horrific photograph. It might be very visible because it's quite small, but it's really shows the terror that existed. Hans writes, the Poles were not big fans either, but I don't think they associate them with communism. Actually, it was the opposite. They were often seen as not paying enough for the goods and services. Not quite entirely certain what you mean by that, but yeah. I mean, no, here in Poland, I mean, they often see the Jews, and it's all the time. I mean, not only that, they often in Poland, I can say there are some people who will blame Jews for communism and things like that. So. It's hard for me to say because I mean I don't speak Lithuanian, so I don't really have access to people as well as I have access in Poland. But unfortunately, there is I would say there still is quite a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland. Yeah, I did a speech about 20 years ago. I was in London, and the audience, about 300 people there, and I said, in Poland, anti-Semitism is dead, but unfortunately we saw, certainly in the last government, that anti-Semitism isn't dead in Poland. Having said that, you know, you've got to bear in mind this is a small part of the overwhelming bulk of people aren't. Unfortunately, there are people within the church itself, like the Roman Catholic Church, who are anti-Semitic, and then they passed on this anti-Semitism to others. And so Donald Duck writes something about costs and food, and Hans says, question, were the Germans actively moving German settlers to Lithuania similar to the Vartagau? No. There was no mass. I suspect actually that they might have actually thought of this, might have gone through somebody's mind. The reason I say this is because the when they divided Poland, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, up. So Stalin got something like 60% of Poland, and Hitler got 40%, something along those lines. Then Stalin decided he wanted Lithuania, which was originally going to be given to Nazi Germany. So he said he wanted Lithuania, and he said in exchange that Nazi Germany got the Poland between the Vistula and the Bug rivers. So I would suggest that they might have thought of this, but it certainly wasn't the case. Many of the this home in the Reich policy, which was to take people of Germans, people of German origin, who were living in the Soviet Union, then resettle them in the Warthegau and in other regions, or in the Danzig West Pomeranian region, as it were. A lot of these people did come from the Baltics, and there was German speakers in Lithuania, but it wasn't really. Most of the Baltic Germans are more associated with Estonia and Latvia, in my opinion. And Donald Duck writes, you must understand what the situation was after World War I in Germany and Russia. You cannot make comparison to today's situation. Okay. Hans says, I agree that the end of World War I, the Eastern Front is... Sorry, the screen jumped. I agree that the end of World War I, the Eastern Front is essential to understand the German attitude towards the Soviet Union, pre-Barbarossa, but it's not explain the extermination of the Jews. No, I think this is just that in Germany, a bunch of conspiracy theorists came into power, and it was because of this that they wanted to take their conspiracy theories to the logical conclusion, which is what they did. And so therefore I don't believe that sorry, no, I'm going to rephrase that to avoid using double negatives. I think that they saw communists as being Jews irrespective, and therefore they had to kill them. But bear in mind, this hate had gone on for hundreds of years. So, I mean, this is the thing. Communism was something new, and the way it was portrayed as being the massacres that were committed by the Reds were given a lot of publicity, but the massacres that were committed by the whites were not. And there were far more massacres committed by the whites than were committed by the Reds. But I think it's because of the communists killed the Russian royal family, and that was what we're seeing as being bad. We also have, for example, the in Germany, when you had the Soviet style governments, for example in Munich, and whereas some people who belonged to the reactionary right were killed, like people in the Tula Society in Munich, for example, but the amount of deaths was nothing compared to the terror that the forces of reaction then did in Munich. But what they then did, they blamed it on the Jews, and admittedly there were far more Jews in the Munich Soviet government than were representative of the population. To a certain extent, it's true as well within the Russian in the Russian Revolution. There were the amount of Jews within the initial revolutionary government was very high. It wasn't by the time Stalin, because there was only one left. But the amount of Jews were in the revolution. Trotsky, Zinoviev. Sorry, mine's gone blank. But anyway, but there were Jews made up of the initial Politburo, about 50%, something like that. So I think that Kamenev, there you go. I think that was the problem. The thing with communism is this: I think it was a matter of publicity more than anything else. It's those that were writing. People were not writing about well, I can't say anything positive because there wasn't anything positive about communism, but they weren't writing negative things about the Tsarist regime. It was treated as though the Tsarist regime was wonderful and saintly, and whereas the communists were all sort of bad and evil. That's how I see it anyway. Hello, Ian. Hans says, so it wasn't German settlers who moved into the Jewish properties? No, that did not happen. I can't think of any examples of that happening in Lithuania. It might have done. Actually, it might have done from those who went... in general, it didn't happen. No, I mean the theft of property certainly did happen, because that was the point of keeping Jews alive, for at least for a few days or weeks to establish what property they actually owned. But it wasn't a case of Jewish settlers. In the case actually of the settlers, it was mainly in Vartagau. It wasn't so much Jewish property that they actually went into. It was previously property that had been owned by Polish farmers, which they occupied. Anyway, good. So, well, thanks very much for watching. It's got quite dark here. I think the rain has now stopped. It's unusually dark even for this time of year, and even though it's 8:30, it's 8:30 here now. I was in Lithuania last week, and it was 9:30, and it's not very far from here, so it got darker an hour later. They're much better, in my opinion. So thanks very much for watching. I might do one again tomorrow night. I'll see. But for the moment, all the best from me, and bye for now.